Lucas Miller thought the worst moment of his life would be the night he realized he had walked into a lie too big to control. He was wrong. The worst moment came later, when the lie demanded a price he wasn't sure he could pay. It started quietly, the way life-changing moments often do, with an email, with a polite smile from legal, with a sentence that sounded reasonable, but carried the weight of a falling building. Reassignment or termination. Clean, professional, final. As Lucas sat there, hands folded to keep them from shaking, he understood something with painful clarity. Somewhere along the way, pretending had stopped being pretend. He hadn't just lied for Victoria anymore. He had lied because he cared. And now caring might cost him everything he had worked for. Jennifer Costa waited patiently, pen hovering above her notepad. Victoria stood beside the table, composed as always, but Lucas could see the storm behind her eyes. She had faced hostile takeovers with less tension than this. Billions of dollars, thousands of employees, global markets. None of that frightened her the way this did. Because this wasn't business. This was personal. Lucas cleared his throat. He thought of Emma, of her backpack by the door every morning, of the way she asked if he'd be home in time for bedtime stories. He thought of how hard it had been to rebuild after losing everything once already. He thought of the promise he had made to himself, never to gamble with his daughter's stability again. "I'll accept reassignment," he said quietly. Victoria's head snapped toward him. For the first time since he'd known her, her mask cracked, just slightly, enough for him to see the fear underneath. Jennifer nodded. "That may be the simplest solution. We'll move you to operations. Similar pay grade, different reporting structure." Lucas forced himself to breathe. Similar pay grade, but not the raise, not the growth, not the proximity to the woman who had somehow become part of his daily emotional landscape. Victoria didn't speak until they were alone in the elevator. The doors closed with a soft final sound that felt louder than it should have. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," Lucas replied. "This was always going to end somehow. At least this way, Emma is safe." Victoria stared straight ahead as the elevator descended. The city blurred behind the glass walls, lights stretching into streaks. "I never meant for this to hurt you," she said, "or her." Lucas gave a tired smile. "I know, but intentions don't stop consequences." They stood in silence until the doors opened. Then, just like that, the version of their relationship that existed inside the office ended. No more shared looks over schedules. No more quiet understanding. No more standing side by side against the world. The following weeks were harder than Lucas expected. Operations was efficient, impersonal. His new manager was kind enough, but distant. Lucas went from being indispensable to being replaceable. He did his job well, because that's who he was, but something inside him felt hollow. Victoria kept her distance, professionally polite, carefully neutral. They passed each other in hallways like strangers who shared a history they weren't allowed to acknowledge. At home, Lucas tried to keep life normal. Pizza Thursdays continued. Homework still mattered. Bedtime stories were never skipped. Emma noticed, though. Children always do. "You're sad sometimes," she said one night, matter of fact, like it was a simple observation. Lucas brushed her hair back. "Just tired, kiddo." She nodded, accepting it, then surprised him by saying, "You should talk to Miss Victoria again." You smiled more when she was around. The words landed gently but firmly. Lucas kissed her forehead and turned off the light, pretending he hadn't felt something break open inside his chest. Winter came early that year. The city grew colder, quieter. Victoria threw herself into work the way she always had, but this time it didn't help. The penthouse felt empty. Success tasted flat. For the first time in her life, she questioned whether winning had actually cost her something she couldn't buy back. Her parents noticed, of course. Margaret called more often. Robert asked questions that sounded casual but weren't. Victoria deflected, delayed, avoided. Until one evening, sitting alone with a glass of wine she hadn't touched, she admitted the truth to herself. The arrangement had ended, but her feelings hadn't. Somewhere between lies and logistics, she had fallen in love with a man who never asked her to be anyone but human. And she had let him go. The breaking point came unexpectedly, on an ordinary Tuesday. Lucas was leaving the building when he heard shouting near the entrance. A woman arguing with security, voice tight with panic. He recognized the voice instantly. Victoria. He moved without thinking. She stood rigid, phone in hand, eyes unfocused. Security stepped back when Lucas approached, recognizing him. "What happened?" he asked. She looked at him like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "My father collapsed. He's in the hospital." Lucas didn't hesitate. "Let's go." He drove. She stared out the window. Somewhere between traffic lights and sirens, she reached for his hand. He let her. At the hospital, hours blurred together. Tests. Doctors. Waiting rooms that smelled like disinfectant and fear. Lucas stayed. He bought coffee. He listened. He didn't try to fix anything. He just didn't leave. Margaret arrived later, grateful, shaken. She looked at Lucas with new eyes, not as a suitable match, not as a placeholder, but as someone who showed up when it mattered. Robert survived. The scare softened something in him, stripped away layers of expectation and pride. When Lucas stood to leave, Robert stopped him. "Thank you," he said simply. That night, standing outside the hospital, Victoria finally let herself cry. Not the composed tears she allowed herself in boardrooms, but the messy kind that come from relief and fear and regret all tangled together. "I don't want to pretend anymore," she said, "about anything." Lucas looked at her, really looked at her. "Then don't." They didn't rush it after that. They talked, really talked, about Emma, about power and imbalance, about what it would mean to choose each other openly, honestly, without contracts or excuses. Victoria made a decision that shocked her board. She stepped back as CEO, transitioning into a strategic role, still powerful, still influential, but no longer Lucas's superior. The headlines buzzed. Speculation ran wild. She didn't care. Months later, on a quiet Sunday, Emma sat between them on a park bench, feeding ducks crumbs from her pocket. George's descendants gathered eagerly. Lucas watched Victoria laugh freely, unguarded. Emma leaned against her like it was the most natural thing in the world. In that moment, Lucas understood something important. Opportunities don't always look like wins at first. Sometimes they look like traps. Sometimes they scare you. Sometimes they cost you comfort, certainty, safety. But sometimes if you walk through them with honesty and courage, they lead you somewhere better than you ever planned. Life doesn't reward perfection. It rewards persistence. It doesn't ask where you started. It asks whether you showed up when it mattered. Lucas Miller had walked into a dinner he never agreed to. He had been forced into a role he never wanted. But by staying true to who he was, as a father, as a man, as someone willing to care, he had earned something real. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that growth often comes disguised as fear, then take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for more stories that prove even the hardest moments can become turning points.